Hallelujah, Abba. We praise thee and we thank thee one more time, Father, never ever enough. For thy love, thy grace, thy Hanan, thine instruction, thy word, thy Moedim, thy Shabbat. We praise thee and we thank thee for thy mercy and for thy cover, for thy Yahusha. Amen.
Amen. So here we are, happens to be July 20th of 2025, a Gregorian calendar, and this is the letter Pei going through Psalm 119. So to start off, I'm going to go through the first word of each of the 8 verses in the Pei section, and we'll go through it next week. So just so you know, next week is going to be the third Selah. And the reason for that is that according to the Mishkan pattern, there's a fence. With the 4-color embroidery, blue, purple, red, white linen, gold thread on the entrance to the Mishkan. So that's like this dividing that keeps people out. Only the priests and Levites were supposed to come in. The public stayed outside. So there's one veil, as it were. So that was the first Selah between the Zion and the Het. And then the second Selah, you've got the barbecue grill and the laver, and then there was this covered place with some kind of a fabric door, and inside the covered place you got the menorah, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense, lining up with Samach and Pei. So we had the second Selah between the noon and the Samach, which would be between the laver and the menorah, basically. And then there's this veil separating the Kadosh Kodashim from the Kadosh place, or the Holy of Holies from the holy place, as they say in English. So that would be between Pei and Zadi. So that'll be next week, the third Selah. And because the word spelled Pei Zadi means he opened his mouth, or it means to detonate. And you could say, well, that's explosive. That's kind of a bad thing for somebody. And you could say, well, the way to pronounce that word Pei Zadi is pizza. And the way you make a pizza is you have the rolled out dough and you scatter bits and pieces of the various condiments, the food pieces, varieties that you're going to put on the pizza. You scatter them around. Well, that's a picture of literally what the word pizza, Pei Zadi or Pei Zadi Hey, means. And you could even look at like a dandelion flower head. The flower turns into the little seed, and then when they get just at the right time, breeze comes and they all just start scattering all around. So that concept of dismembering or exploding and scattering, disseminating, as it were, that's what Pei Zadi means. And when Yeshua, in Matthew 5, when YHUH was giving the Sermon on the Mount, it starts off saying, seeing the multitude, he went up into a mountain, and sat down, and he opened his mouth, and he taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That was the first line. And you could say, well, he opened his mouth. And that's a very weird thing to say. But that word is Pei Zadi. So the interesting thing is, if you know the language, if you know the Hebrew ALEF-BEIT, as you're reading various Bible stories, and you see something like that, you go, hey, wait a minute, I recognize that. For the fact that he opened his mouth, well, the letter Pei means mouth. And not just mouth, it's drawn, the orthography of the letter is drawn like a mouth. And you could say, well, the modern letter looks a little bit weird, but you could see it as a mouth, cartoon style side view of a mouth. But the point is, it literally means that which opens. And so typically the mouth is the thing that opens. And so you say, well, that's the first concept that comes to mind when you think Pei, mouth. It's like your eyes can open, your understanding can open, your heart can open, the door can open. In fact, when a river winding through the valleys and the mountains comes to the ocean, it's said that at the delta, it opens to the sea. That's a pei. Anything that is one thing of itself, which then opens to join and spread out to join another mass, you might say, is a pei. Well, Yeshua rising from the dead, that's a pei. And so to look at his sprout of life as victory over the death, that's the Zadi. So pizza is not just explosion demolition. It's, I see Pei Zadi as Yeshua rising from the dead. Well, but Pei, if it's associated with he opened his mouth, then you could say, well, mouth has to do with language. Well, the Hebrew language for centuries was effectively like Latin or Sanskrit, dead language, not used except for some exclusive scholarly cloisters, you might say. They still use Latin today in law and medicine, but it's not a commonly verbalized for normal conversation, communication. You could say, well, the same thing happened to Hebrew. In fact, they say there's a fellow by the name of Eliezer ben Yehuda in the early 1900s who got some idea in his head. I don't know the full story about what happened, but you might say he felt a mantle of a burden put upon him to restore the language, restore Hebrew, because people were not speaking Hebrew. They might have been using Yiddish in Europe, but Yiddish is kind of a blend, some Hebrew stuff, but it's blended with a bunch of other languages too. And he had this thing about getting Hebrew spoken and used by the common people as the Jews' language. Now, that's my understanding. So what he did was started learning it, and I guess he started writing out a dictionary or something, but then he made a rule in his own household to his wife and his kids. It's like, okay, you're not allowed to speak any other language. You got to speak Hebrew. And they didn't even know Hebrew. And it's like, hey, I don't care. Start doing it. And it's like, wow, if that was in the early 1900s, and it probably took a couple decades to get it up and rolling. Well, by the time you get to 1948, and principally the Ashkenazi Jews who had been living in Europe and were holocausted by Hitler's Germany and banished from those places or sent running to escape the torments, ended up coming back to what we now call the land of Israel. And they were tried to be kept out even by the British. The British didn't even want them coming back in. So it's not like the whole world opened up to receive them and everybody thought it was a great thing. And they weren't even necessarily speaking Hebrew at that time. But that was 1948. And so then they started, you might say, evolving. So on into the 50s or the 60s or 1970s even. Before, this is my understanding, before Hebrew became, well, if you're a Jew, if you're an Israeli, you speak Hebrew. But they didn't, but they do now. And I've heard it said that there's a difference between biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew or Israeli Hebrew. And I couldn't tell you what all the differences are, but there's the way things are expressed, perhaps. Modern Hebrew has also picked up a bunch of, you might say, foreign words. So, for example, if you use Klein's dictionary, sometimes you'll see, because it's an etymological dictionary, you'll see in parentheses where it says this is an Akkadian root or Syrian or Aramaic or Arabic or French or whatever, Latin, Greek. And sometimes it'll just say FW. And the FW means, well, this is now what's used as a Hebrew word that came from a foreign word. In other words, some of the words in the Klein's dictionary are saying, well, this is a Hebrew word. And to validate the notion of what this word really means, you can look at the other ancient languages in the surrounding geography around Israel, Akkadian, Sumerian, Aramaic, Arabic, Greek, Roman, and you can see, look at, they have very, very similar words. And the benefit of looking at the etymological dictionary that I see is that it helps you realize that, well, if there's another language and they have a very similar word, but maybe it's a little different, it's the gist or the essence of the phonetic base that's similar is what sticks in the mind and is carried through. So when Elohim scrambled the languages at the Tower of Babel, if it started off to be that Hebrew was what they call the Edenic, like from the Garden of Eden, the one language that everybody on earth spoke, if because nobody can prove it exactly, but if Hebrew was the Edenic language, the first original that Adam was given to understand, to speak, that his mind was programmed in Hebrew to name the animals, that was his first task. Then at the Tower of Babel, what happened was it started morphing or changing. Now you could say, well, it's just another language. You know, you were speaking Hebrew one day and all of a sudden Elohim said, you know, scramble the languages, may it be so. And boom, all of a sudden you're speaking, you know, French or Chinese or some other that you didn't learn, you didn't know. It's just, hey, I'm just speaking that language. How about that? And then you can't understand anybody else. And you find some, hey, you're speaking my language. Well, I guess we're supposed to hang out together. Let's go. And that's what happened. It says they were separated by their languages. And so everybody that was hanging around there building the Tower of Babel had to bump into who else is speaking my same language. And I guess we're destined to be a people together. And then they started separating and spreading out across the earth, going away to be exclusively where their language was. But the fact that you can look back and say, hey, wait a minute, look, though, all these different languages are kind of the same phonetic root. So Isaac Moseson's book, Origin of Speeches, talks about this. And he says, so what he thinks happened, if I could put it in my own words, is that what was originally Hebrew, maybe quickly, but it started rolling, as it were, changing, maybe changed all of a sudden, so people immediately separated, but then it kept changing. And he can look at a couple hundred different languages and tell you the Hebraic, the Hebrew word root. And he did a book called The Word, which shows you 20,000 English words came right out of Hebrew, like Oregon, the state here. Or is light, Ori is my light, and Gon is garden. So Oregon is my light garden, or garden of light. So I think Hebrews named this place Hawaii. Hawaii. Well, that's read left to right, Hawaii, but read it right to left as if you're going to read it Hebrew version, right to left, and it's give the same four phonetics. Ha, u, ah, e, u, ah, u, ah, u, ah. Yeah, well, that's the sacred name of the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He-Vav-He. How'd that get to be there in Hawaii? Read the other direction, and it's like, and then you could look at Iowa, one of the states in the Midwest of the United States. Right at the heart in the middle is Iowa. Iowa. That's the four letters of the sacred name right there. And it goes on and on. So you could say, well, do you look or do you validate Hebrew by looking at these other languages? And did they move and morph? Or are the languages completely different? Well, they're not completely different. That's the study of the Edenic study of linguistics. And so when we mentioned in Zephaniah 3:9 a couple weeks ago that Elohim says, I'm going to restore a pure language. so that they all can serve Elohim, obey, worship Elohim with a common shoulder, Shechem Echad. And then you say, well, there's the word Shechem, Shin Kaf Mem, is more than just shoulder. It means to rise up early, go search diligently, and Echad is unified. And the idea is, hey, wait a minute, like with the letter Samic, the word spelled Samic ayin means to branch out or diversify or many different variations. Like the branch of the menorah has 6 branches plus there's one in the middle, and so it's branched out. Not that that's a bad thing. That's what happened to the language. But then he said, all these different people scattered across the face of the earth are going to come back to the singularity so that they can worship Elohim with the same central trunk, as it were. In other words, well, the real identity of Yahuwah is what it is, but we all somehow have evolved into, like the different languages, different ideas of who he is and what it means to be his people and what it means to love him and what it means to worship him, what it means to obey him. And I could tell you, there's the calendar and there's food and there's clothing and there's dancing, and the Presbyterian church my parents went to said dancing is carnal, it's evil, it's a sin, never dance. Yeah, but Israelis do circle line dancing. You know, the Renaissance fair, Old England 400 years ago that they recreate, they do. The peasants do a circle dance, and then there's other Morris dancing. Is all that carnal and evil? Well, it's just don't do it. And it's like, is that a law? Is that a rule? And it's like, well, how do we all do some simple little thing? I thought that David was dancing as a worship, as a praise. It's like, can't we agree on not what, if you don't want to dance, don't dance. But I'm saying, can't we agree on what Yahuwah wants us to do or how he wants us to think? It's like, no, we can't. We're not going to agree. We're not going to agree as long as the languages are diversified. But if it comes back to a singularity of language, a pure, clean bet resh, hey, to create is the word bet resh aleph, which was used in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Bereshit bara, bet resh aleph, Elohim. He created, but bet resh hey, and even the word Brit for Bet Resh Yod Tav, meaning translated covenant, means to clarify and express something clearly without misunderstanding. And then there was what was written, and then there was various Levites that taught the people, because there is misunderstanding, and you have some people think differently than other people, especially if you have a different, you might say, indigenous language. I've heard it said that if you take people from a different, you might say, your native language, if let's just say it's French versus English versus Korean or something, and then you say, well, now you all learn Hebrew. You're going to all learn a common language. Let's say you all learn German. Because of the way you were raised, you're going to think differently, and you're going to understand differently the new thing you're being taught. Now, if you could filter that, say, through another language, like everybody learn English, and then from that English, everybody learn Hebrew or something, that might even things out a little bit. More filters strain out, not error meaning that they're wrong, but you might say avant-garde thinking. More filters will bring it all into homogeneous sort of uniformity. But is that what Yahweh meant? Did he mean, okay, I'm going to scramble all the languages at Babel, and then bring everybody back to speak let's say, the common language of English, like nowadays in the 21st century. But, the other interesting thing is that now there's AI, and instead of a person learning another language and trying to wrap their mind, what do I hear that person saying? ¿Dónde es el baño? What did he say? Spanish for where's the bathroom? But plug in your phone and hold it up and it'll tell you what he's saying, so your mind doesn't even have to think. So is that making it better? Well, see, if your mind isn't thinking, if you're not trying to understand what you're hearing, if you're not seeing the letters, then yeah, you're communicating, but somehow it's not affecting you. Certainly not affecting you the same way. So if there's something in the heart of the language of Ivrit, of Hebrew, which is, you might say, the intention of Hebrew is not just to have a language that works, because all the languages work. English works really well. You could say, in terms of specifics, perhaps English works better than Hebrew, but it's not about, can we communicate? Can we build? I mean, look they were starting to build the Tower of Babel, and Elohim, kind of talking to himself there somehow, or talking to one of the angels or something, he says, boy, if we don't slow these guys down, nothing they put their mind to will be withheld from them. And I say, slow these guys down. He didn't come down here and say, you dirty, rotten scoundrels, I'm going to change your language. He said, scatter the earth, scatter across the face of the earth. And they didn't. They were making one tower in one location. And he says, well, in other words, like, is the timing of human activity, how long does it take us to get something done, and building various cultures and empires and cities and inventions of flying machines or whatever it might be? He knows we're going to do it because the universe was built to accommodate those things, but he wants to slow us down. Apparently, he determined that by changing the language, that would slow us down, collectively, humanity at large, because there's also then fighting between the groups, wars, and if you don't speak our language, we're going to take your stuff and make you the slave now or something. That's what's happened. So something about bringing back a pure, clean, common language should make it possible to get along better and to do things that we weren't able to do before. But see, he said very specifically, the intention for bringing back the common, pure, clean language was that we could worship him, serve him, have an agreement of who is he, what's his name, and what's he want us to do. So let's help each other, encourage each other in doing that. It's not about human achievement in terms of technology or motor cars. It's about worshiping Yahweh. So I look at this and I assess this all to say, there's something in Hebrew which, if you know that language, which is his language, as he's the guy who gave it to Adam, and it's a heavenly language. Well, how do you know Hebrew's a heavenly language? At a associate say, well, why don't you study ancient Egyptian? Why don't you study Sanskrit or some other language that's Sumerian cuneiform? It's older than Hebrew. The Hebrews copied them anyway, so why don't you go back to something that's a better source? And it's like, because I see the Mishkan pattern in ancient Hebrew. That's why. Because the Mishkan pattern is the signature of Yod-He-Vav-He. It's his identification of himself. He's the guy who decided what to do on each of the 7 days in Genesis 1:1, starting with he created the heavens and the earth. So that's his great fame. He's the creator. That's the first thing he tells us. I am the creator. If there's anything you need to know about who he is, he's the creator of heaven and earth. And then he says, I did it in this manner. 6 days, well, then he rested on the seventh. No, that's a big part of it is what he did on the seventh day. It's a really big part. As a matter of fact, in the Ten Commandments, he goes on to say, by keeping the regard of the Shabbat, you are acknowledging that my identity is the creator of heaven and earth. If you don't keep the Shabbat, then that means you are giving a different value to who he is, a different identity. Now, you might include that he's the creator of heaven and earth, but you're not including the part of his identity that says, keep this day as a holy, sacred, kadosh regard, because I'm telling you, human beings, Adam, that I determined that I was going to set the pace. I'm going to rest on the seventh day. And that is doing something. It's not doing the normal type of work, but it's certainly a doing. And that's critically important. And so therefore you, all of mankind, will do that also. But nobody cares. Well, Israel, I'm going to make it a commandment, the fourth commandment, Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5. And he says, do not work. And don't let your animals or your manservant, maidservant work. Anybody within your gates, do not work, fulfill your needs on that day. You will take a break. And then he says otherwise, because I made the world in 6 days, rested on the seventh. And this is the sign that you're listening to me, you're obeying me. Now, see, there's an interesting thing there. It's like, well, we're listening to him, we're obeying him, he knows our heart. Well, I got to see as a token, a sign that you're listening to me. And I could say, well, make it be something important. You know, if you're really listening to me, go give that poor person $1,000. Or take $100,000 and go provide wells for the thirsty people in Africa. Not that that's a bad thing to do, but that's not what he said. It's kind of like what he said is, here, if you're listening to me, then take this random object and stick it on your shoulder. If you're listening to me. It's like, what's that got to do with anything? Nothing. It's not about the random object sitting on your shoulder. It's, I need to see a token that you're listening to me. Well, you know I want to listen. No. But see, there's more to it. What he said was, his throne sits on Mishpat and Tzedakah. Well, that's justice and righteousness. No, it's more than that. See, justice means do what you say you're going to do. If you say, look, I'll mow your lawn for $100, you don't mow the lawn, you don't get the $100. But if you do mow the lawn, the guy, the owner of the lawn, pays you $100. That's balanced scales of justice. Mem, shin, pei, tet. But pei, tet, you look that up in the dictionary, and it means stalemate. That means nobody wins, nobody loses. So if two teams are playing basketball and they each have 20 points, it's a tie. That's a stalemate. They each have 20. Nobody's winning and nobody's losing. That's then shin is that which belongs to. Mem is the object or the time or the place or the one who belongs to the stalemate. So mem, shin, pei, tet could be read as, oh, this is what it looks like when everything is the way it's supposed to be. Fair, just, right. Nobody trying to lie or rip off anybody else. That's mishpat. Okay, so the throne of Elohim sits on mishpat. Yeah, but see, if you translate the word mishpat to be right ruling, judgment, justice, ordinance, statute, and it's like, what are all these things? It's like your mind starts wondering, how do you do that? So David says, hey, I want to be all about your mishpat. And it's like, what does he mean by that sentence, that phrase? I want to know and do and participate in your mishpat. Well, that means I need to make a bunch of contracts with people so I can fulfill my side of the contract. Well, that's one way to do it. But what's Yahuwah's contract? Yahuwah's contract, very clearly, he says, I've got a Brit, a covenant with Israel. Only Israel, no other people group on the face of the earth. Now, this is the way it works. Israel, you're supposed to be just like me. You're supposed to imitate me. The word het kuf, chok, is translated imitate. Het kuf yod is my imitate me, or this is my imitation, the imitation of me. So you could say, well, okay, what does he want us to do? Well, het kuf is also the word law. It's also the word constitution. It's also, this is just the way it is. So whoever he is and whatever he's about, the hook, law, constitution of the kingdom of heaven, is that Israel must, without option, imitate Yahuwah. Well, if Israel's going to imitate Yahuwah, he's got to tell us, show us, reveal, open the heavens and let us see what he is about. Who is he and how does he do his stuff? Well, he didn't open the heavens and give us display. What he did is spoke from the top of Mount Sinai, and then he took his finger and carved, engraved in the tables of stone, the 10 Debarim, the 10 matters, the 10 things which are of critical regard for Israel to do. And he said, well, the word chok also means to engrave or encarve. So if you go to a public building, government building, let's say, and you see that there's words carved in stone, you say, well, that's just some fancy calligraphy, hammer and chisel carving in stone or laser or whatever, rather than writing on paper. So it's fancy. It's built into the building. It's like, no. It's more than that. When you carve something in stone, it's a law, because that's what the word het kuf means. In Hebrew, het kuf means law, constitution, decree, imitate. And if you don't imitate it, you've broken the law. That's het kuf. Well, the Sabbath day, Yahweh said, okay, here, I'm going to do something. As silly as putting a little thing on your shoulder. He says, I'm going to rest on the seventh day. Okay, now you're supposed to imitate me. In fact, I'm going to make it a law, a decree carved in stone. You have to imitate me and rest on the seventh day. Okay, then if he's the Elohim, creator of the universe, heaven and earth, and that's what he did, and then that's what he does, and that's what he told us to do, then there is no option legally, rationally, and pure, clean communication with one language. Everybody's going to have to go, okay, I get it. Why? Because of what het kuf means. Well, it means law. It means imitate. No, it means everything I just said. Because that het kuf, so every time you read in Psalms 119 or anywhere else where David says, your chokika, het kuf yod kaf. Well, the yod makes it personal, and the kaf means you. So if David's speaking and he says, het kuf yod kaf, I'm going to imitate, the yod suffix, I will, het kuf, imitate your law, so I'm just trying to tell you the way I wrap my mind around the use of the prefixes and suffixes. But there's more to that. You could say, well, the letter het in the Mishkan pattern is the big white fence. Well, what's the letter kuf? If the word is spelled het kuf, well, kuf is the pillar of fire, the vertical thing, and the pillar of smoke, the billowing thing. So I draw it as a little motif, glyph graphic is a question mark. There's the billowing, and exclamation point. There's the pillar of fire. Well, that was above the Ark of the Covenant when Elohim's presence was in the Mishkan. So if the Zodi lines up with the Ark of the Covenant, the Kadosh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, then when Elohim was present, you'd have the kuf, our letter Q in English, as the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, above the Ark of the Covenant, above the Mishkan, spread out around over the tent, almost like the tent covering over the camp of the Israelites. saying like a hen gathering its chicks under her wings. The QOOF pillar of smoke, pillar like a column, or pillow meaning billowing and spreading out. It's like these word pictures. So then I can see in the word het QOOF, there's this fence. That's the Mishkan itself, the outer perimeter of the Mishkan. And then the QOOF, the cloud over the top of the Mishkan, and then the camp of Israel rounding it. It's like he's gathering his people, his concerns under his wings. And then you have that psalm, which they turned into a song, under the shadow of his wings. Yeah, like that. So I can see het QOOF as that's where I want to be. If I want to be under the shadow of his wings, in his het, under his QOOF, abiding in the shelter they bring. There's torments outside. There's the arrow that flies by day, the terror by night, but under your wings, there's refuge and safety. Well, if that's the picture of het QOOF, then what that means is I need to imitate what he did, which means stop working on Saturday. Well, if the Sabbath day is not Saturday, but a different day of the week, and I hold that possibility as an option, it really might be the truth that we've been lied to about Saturday and the 7-day cycle. I don't know the answer. I don't know. But I'm going with Saturday because I haven't had the time or the clarity to say this is exactly what it is. And it might be that you've got looking at the phase of the moon, it might be. But, and this is the big critical matter in my thinking, in the days of the Council of Nicaea, Emperor Constantine, it's my understanding, they came to the determination and I heard the Catholic radio say this, they changed the holy day from Saturday, the 7th day of the week, to Sunday, the 1st of the week. Now, they justified it by saying, well, that's the day Jesus rose from the dead. But they said it was in order to prove or to blatantly stand up in the face of the finger of Elohim written on tables of stone and saying our voice supersedes the authority of the finger of Elohim and his voice speaking from top Mount Sinai to the Jews, demanding the 7th day. No, we're changing it, making it the 1st day. So there. And that became what we call Sunday. And it's like blatant offense, heresy, blasphemy. Sunday? The worship holy day? It cannot be because of their own mouth telling you why they changed it. And besides that, if you look back and say, well, Yeshua actually didn't get crucified on Friday and raised Sunday morning, he was crucified probably Wednesday afternoon and he rose Saturday night before the day changed to be Sunday morning. And so that's even a bogus twisting of when does a day start and on it. And it's like, wow. And so my point is, if Zephaniah 3:9 is going to be a reality, then everybody who wants to worship Elohim as his people in truth has got to at least go back to the Sabbath day, not Sunday. And I say that because the way the quadrants of the moon are calculated, every once in a while it turns out to be on Sunday. That's a different matter. But what I'm saying is that it's at least not Sunday. Well, hey, man, you got the entire Christendom. So you've got the Orthodox Church and its permutations. You've got the Catholic Church, and then you've got 50, if not 80,000 permutations, branches of the Protestant Church, and then some renegade groups that don't fall into any category, like the JWs, the SDAs, the LDS, that are kind of their own thing. And it's like, why? Hey, listen, are they all going to come back? Why? What's going to make them all come back to obed, serve, worship Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, with Shechem Echad? The language. He's going to restore Hebrew. Well, not just restore Hebrew, because the Jews are speaking Hebrew and they don't agree with the Christians. It's not about just Hebrew. It's about understanding the truth, understanding what the language is telling us. That's the Mishkan pattern. See, without the Mishkan pattern, in my thinking, Hebrew is just another language. In fact, they'll tell you, look at an encyclopedia, they'll say, well, every Semitic language comes from, they'll say Phoenician. Well, what's Phoenician? Hebrew. The Hebrew became known as Phoenician, which then got turned into Greek, which got turned into Latin, and then all the various European permutations, Semitic language base. And that's essentially saying there's a handful of vowels which you can plug in between a set group of consonants and a three-letter verb root. I think those are the specifications of the Semitic language base. And people say, linguistics professional scholars say, developing the Semitic alphabet is perhaps humanity's greatest invention. Changed everything. And it's like, well, when did that happen? Somewhere around 1000 BC. That's what they say. It's like, wait a minute, if Adam was speaking Hebrew, yeah, but nobody knows what Adam was speaking. It got lost. Well, okay, listen, Noah was speaking Hebrew then, and Noah's 3 sons were speaking Hebrew, and they were still speaking Hebrew when the Tower of Babel happened. Well, some people think that when the Tower of Babel happened, Hebrew got lost. All the languages became different. Nobody was still speaking Hebrew. Well, it wasn't like if you got 100 different people, they all have 100 different languages now, but one of them's Hebrew. It's like, no, even Hebrew's gone. And it's like, well, then how'd they get Hebrew back? And then I believe it's in the book of Jubilees, some angel showed up and met up with Abraham, or perhaps even Melchizedek, and said, hey, Abraham, let me give you now the Hebrew again. Now that you are the chosen man to have the family, the heritage of being Yahuwah's own personal people, I'm going to give you Hebrew. And then Abraham was to teach his children, who taught their children. That's one theory. And so if that's the case, then it's like, this Hebrew is a really big deal. But it's not just, okay, let's have all the Israelis speak Hebrew or a version of modern Hebrew and call it good. It's like, no. We have to see Yahuwah's identity in the language. That's not just communication. That's Yahuwah's personal identity. So when he made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, that's the pattern. And then when he has the 7 Moedim, besides the Shabbat, Leviticus 23, the most clear place it's written out, that's the same pattern as the 7 days of creation. Pesach lining up with day 1. Chag HaMatzot, unleavened bread, lining up with day 2, where he separated water from water. Day 1, he said, let there be light. Day 3, Shavuot, the 3rd festival, the Moed, as 50 days of counting, lining up where he spoke and put seed, plant life, into the soil of the earth, Mother Earth, as it were, and it incubated and gestated and then broke out as plant life. That's day 3. So the whole 50 days of counting is like this pregnancy, conception to birth of the baby. Day 4, the menorah, putting sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Day 5, table of showbread, fish in the sea, birds in the air. Day 6, altar of incense, lining up with Sukkot, animals and man on the face of the earth. And then Shabbat lining up with Shemini Atzeret, lining up with the Ark of the Covenant. There's the Mishkan pattern lining up with the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. And because of that, if you can see that and say everything between the Het, if that's Pesach, and the Kuf, well, if Shemini Atzeret is the Zadi, what's the Kuf? Well, Het Zadi is the word Chatz, which means arrow. Chatzi, my arrow, we were talking earlier about that. It means to bisect, to cut something in half. Sagittal, Sagittarius. An arrow is something which divides, which partitions. Is he going to make the great divide between the people, the sheep and the goats, the wheat from the tares? They know my name. I don't know you. What is the matter of being divided and separated? What is it? They love me. It's not about love. He said in Psalms 91, as we talked last week, because they know my name, I will show them my salvation. Because they know my name. I saw a translation of Psalm 91 online the other day, and they changed it. It says, because he loves me, I will save him. And it's like, that's not what it says. Somebody could say, well, look at, we see the Hebrew word, and it says, because he dalet ayin, or yada, my Shem, because he yadas my Shem, I will show him my Yeshua. I will reveal my translation. And it's like, yeah, but knowing his Shem is not the same as love, not the same as having faith. See, it's how you choose to translate each word, which makes a huge difference. And if you say, well, all the Baptists are going to agree that if you yada the Shem of Yahweh, that means you love him. And if you, the Catholics are going to say, well, if you yada the Shem of Yahweh, then you'll do a certain ritual, say some Hail Marys. And it's like, no, wait a minute. What does Yahuwah mean when he says, if you yada my Shem? What does he mean by that? The only way that I can see that we can know what he means by anything he said is look at what he said. Read the words, which means we have to have the spelling. You don't have to have the spelling to know his words, because there's some languages, human languages on earth, that are not written down. There's no orthography. So they have to invent a language so they can write words in the Bible and then show that and that so they can read. The Wycliffe Bible translators do that. But what I'm saying is that's somebody's assumed definition, and let's all agree that that's what it is, so then now we all can have a common culture and we can all understand. But that's not what Yahweh's saying. He's saying we got to all be able to worship, serve Obed, Ayin Bet Dalet, him, with one shoulder, one. Rise up early and seek. That's Shechem. Like the women going to the tomb of Yeshua. They got up early while it was still dark, just starting to become daylight. That's the word Shachar Allah. That's when they got up. That's when they went to go to the tomb and to seek. And that's when they realized YHUH was not any longer in the tomb. He had risen. They didn't know that, but that's the story. So that's to do. Shechem, the word shoulder, is to do something like I remember when we were kids, sometimes we'd go on a trip and my dad would have the station wagon. Back in the 60s, he'd load it up and have the gear tied down on the top of the vehicle, and he'd wake us up like 3 a.m. We'd get in the car and still be half asleep, and because we had to drive across the desert from Los Angeles, cutting across the Mojave Desert, and he wanted to make distance while it was still cool. That attitude, that doing of getting up early because it's productive, that's the word Shechem. And the verse in Zephaniah says people from all the nations are going to be doing that. Well, how are they going to be doing it? They're not going to be learning various doctrines and have, well, you've got a strong concordance, and you've got this translation, and you've got Klein's dictionary, and you've got this other guy's. It seems to me this only way possible is for everybody to understand that Yahweh gave definitions of his own words. And the way he did it was the Mishkan pattern, in that if you look at what he did on those 7 days of creation, and you look at and regard to keep the 7 Moedim as testimonies of his identity, and you look at the way he designed the architectural layout, the footprint, the blueprint of the Mishkan, and that they're all the exact same pattern, which fits the alphabet, not only the first 7 letters key to the 7 days, but then the next 11 letters between het and zadi, het and kuf, if you look at the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, it's the same pattern. And if you can wrap your mind around that, that's him. And because that's him, that's the witness and testimony, ayin dalet, his bejewelment, his ornamentation. Look, I've ornamented myself with these letters and this pattern encoded. That's like a DNA code of who he is. And Yahusha's only in his father's name and only doing what he sees his father doing. So Yahusha's true identity has to be held and wrapped up, mummified, as it were, in the form, the figure, the Yod Zadi Resh of those Moedim. Well, what that means is if you say, hey, our group, our church, our association doesn't have any regard of those Jewish holidays. And it's like, well, then you don't have Yodeh Vaveh. You might believe in God. You might give him whatever attributes you want to give him. Some of them might be similar. But if you don't regard the Moedim, if you don't regard the Sabbath day, it ain't Yodeh Vaveh. If you don't regard the 10 Commandments, it ain't Yod-He Vav-He. And I've heard it said by various different Christian preachers, the 10 Commandments are not for the Christians, those are for the Jews. Is that true? It's true according to them. I would have a different way of describing it. I would say it's not for the Jews, it's for the whole house of Israel. 12 tribes. Jews are just one of the 12. It's for all of them, and whoever are the proselytes, wannabes, because Yahweh said there's one Torah for the native born and the sojourner. You want to be Israel? One Torah. You don't want to be Israel? Well, you could do whatever you want. You could believe whatever you want. You can hope for whatever you want. But if you want to be Israel and you want to count on absolutely the reality, it's what Yahweh said. It's the 10 Debarim. It's the Moedim. It's the Shabbat. It's his name. And what's his mishpat? He said, I got to give you guys something to do. So here, I'm going to give you this silly little thing. Eat unleavened bread for a week in the spring. That's stupid. We're not going to do that. Well, then you're not my people. You're not my people. Well, we're going to be your other people. We're going to be the other flock. We're going to be the bride of Christ flock. Is there a bride of Christ flock? Or is there one shepherd with 2 flocks that he's the one guy at the gate held together? Look at the letter chet, and it almost looks like the 2 dippers, the big dipper, the little dipper overlapped with a pin with one gate, Husha at the gate, the one shepherd holding the 2 flocks together. Oh, well, that's Christians and Jews, is it? Or is it Ephraim and Yehuda? Which is it? If you're a Christian that doesn't want to keep the Sabbath day, doesn't want to regard his name, doesn't want to regard his Moedim or his 10 Commandments, you better hope it's Christians and Jews. Because if it's really Ephraim and Yehuda, you're in a heap of trouble. Not being his people. And saying, Lord, Lord, we did all this stuff in your name. You'd obviously given us your spirit because we were doing miracles in the name of your spirit, by the power of your spirit. And he said, I never knew you. Well, then that meant, if he could say those words, I never knew you, then that must mean he designed the universe in such a way that it looks like it's his spirit, but it's not. Hey, there's an angel of light posing. It's like, whether it's the angel of light, whether it's some other, maybe it's your own imagination. I don't know what it is, but there must be a way to conduct witchcraft and it not be of him, but he says, don't do it. But he created the universe to accommodate it. There must be a way that science just works. Certain frequencies make you feel better, maybe even bring you sanity and heal you. But is it about the frequencies? I'm not against the frequencies, but the question is, it's about observing his chok and imitating his commands. If you want to be sane, if you want to be healthy, that's what it's about. I've seen things on the internet where a guy says, oh, some guy in a cave or meeting up with some group of people over in Egypt or Jordan or somewhere or some Masonic temple, they said, hey, there's a 9-word prayer. If you say this, you'll attract wealth. Is that the way it works? Well, maybe it does. But what's attracting wealth about? Who's Yahweh? Are you his people? There's a verse we're going to look at in Isaiah where it says, to know Yahuwah's Torah, that's treasure. Or I'm paraphrasing it. To know Yahuwah, that's the only treasure. That's the only thing of any value. If you say the 9-word prayer, to which God? Do you say it in the right tone of voice, the right frequency, the right heart, the right mind, the right get right there? And then it's like, whoa, I don't think it's about any of that stuff, but it is about, do you know Yahweh's Shem? Do you have the right deity that you think is in God we trust? Which God do you trust in? Because Yahuwah identified himself by Leviticus 23, the Sabbath day and his Moedim. That's how he identified himself. And he gave us his name, Exodus chapter 3, ALEF-He Yod-He and Yod-He Vav-He. He gave us the Mishkan pattern, which is all in the ALEF-BEIT, which means the ALEF-BEIT is also his identity, which is the ALEF-TAV, the Et, never translated, but it's the meaning of the letters. If all that's the case, then for us to say, well, what did he say when he opened his mouth? He was speaking Hebrew. Well, I've heard it said, oh, he knows my heart. It's like, yeah, but do we know his heart? If you are worshiping a God, even if it's Jesus Christ, which is not expressing the words, the voice, the heart of Yahweh Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, by definition, it's an Elohim Acharim. That's Aleph, Chet, Resh, Yod, Mim. So Elah or Eloah is translated God. Elohim is a plurality, but it also is a majestic singularity. So in Hebrew, if you have you might say a noun that's in the plural, you also have the adjective in the plural. So achar, you might say, is the adjective referring to Elohim. So if it's Elohim, you say acharim, the plural. But achar, if you look in the dictionary, it's translated future, next, different, strange, other. It's not now, it's not this, it's something else. It's something else that comes later. It's something else that's delayed. Well, Yeshua came later than Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moshe, David. He came much later. So that makes him achar. Is he an Elohim? Well, the Christians say Jesus Christ is our God. Okay, so that makes him Elohim Achrim. By definition. Is he different? Is he other? Is he strange compared to anything our forefathers would have known? Well, if the Spirit, the Holy Spirit of Jesus Christ, speaking to his apostles, prophets, priests, professors, and tells them to tell the laity, change the day of worship in order to honor my resurrection. So he spoke through Constantine and the bishops and elders and cardinals and popes and says 7 ecumenical councils. And he says, okay, everybody's got to agree that we're changing the day from the 7th day to the 1st day. The Holy Spirit validated that, then that's a bogus Holy Spirit by definition. It's an Elohim Achrim by definition. But I can only define it that way if I know what the word means. And when I keep saying Elohim Achrim, you go back to the 2nd commandment of the 10 Devarim, and it says, Lo Yayi Laka Elohim Achrim Al Panei. Lamed Aleph, do not. Lo Yi Yod-He, which is by your hand caused to exist, allow or do or make. Lo Yi Laka, for yourselves, Elohim Achrim. Do not get together a council, ask for the Holy Spirit, and then invent a different God, an Elohim Achrim. That's the 2nd commandment. Translated differently, and we didn't do that. That's exactly what you did. Then if I want to be Israel, I cannot participate in that consciousness nor behavior. I can't. Because I think that the 10 Debarim, the 10 matters, are for me, not the Jews, me, now. So what's a pei? A mouth. Yahweh said so, and I have to then regard it as law. Yeah, but I didn't understand that. I didn't see that. So then my eye has to pay open to his words, open, which is his heart, opened, which has been closed all this time, even though I thought my heart was open to him, being raised in Greco-Roman Christian culture, American, British. All of a sudden, I had to see, not true. And then I had to repent. I didn't do it on purpose. Well, then it was an unintentional sin, wasn't it? And he gave allowance for that. You guys, he said to Israel, if you suddenly become aware of an unintentional sin, there's a sacrifice you can do for that. You know, bring your lamb or doves or pigeons or whatever it might be. But the Yom Kippur sacrifice was for the nation. Well, he put the whole entire northern kingdom, 10 tribes, as a nation in lockdown. You're locked out. He said in Ezekiel 4, 390 days, a day for a year, 390 years. And Leviticus 26, he said, if you guys don't want my stuff and you don't come back, multiply it by 7, because 7 is the word vow, and it means you got to keep the vow. And so just like you swore a vow, if you break the vow, then it's like 7. I'll bless you 7 times over, or you get cursed 7 times over. So we multiplied 390 times 7. That's 2,730 years of a curse. The Assyrians fully conquered the northern kingdom, 10 tribes, in 721 BC, and that brings you to 2010 CE or AD. That's 2025. Is it time for a break?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, thank you. So my point is, just like Yeshua coming out of the tomb, Ephraim coming out of the curse is a peizadi. The language coming back is a peizadi. The heart of Israel to return with a shechem echad, one shoulder, to worship Yahweh Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, not Elohim Achrim, is a peizadi. And it's all right now. And it's never been before, because for 2,730 years, there was an imposed lockout, a curse put on his own people by Yahweh. And then if you look at Ezekiel, I think it's in Ezekiel 37, where Yahweh says to Ezekiel, he says, take up one stick and write for Yehudah and his brethren, and the other stick, Ephraim and his brethren, his comrades, and hold the 2 sticks and they'll become one in your hand. And I will bring the 2 houses of Israel back together, and never again will they be divided as 2 nation groups. But you see, that's been also lost to our consciousness. Oh, the lost 10 tribes. Yeah, a bunch of punks. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody cares. He cares, because he said he was going to bring the nation back together. So when he brings the nation back together, and when he brings the language back to his people, so that they can all worship him with one shechem echad, it's not about, oh yeah, they're speaking Hebrew. It's about, oh, they understand very clearly who he is, what he said, and what that's all about. And the only way to do that is to know every letter, each of the 22 letters. So this particular study, there might be other ones out there, but this particular study of saying, what's this letter pei? And guess what? It looks like it lines up in time and space with right now. That makes this a very critical time to understand, to try to wrap your mind around this language. And we're going to look at something after looking at the Psalms here, Psalm 119, as soon as we take this break. In Isaiah 31, 32, 33, where it says something about suddenly everybody, no, suddenly the lost tribes and a few billion people maybe are going to learn the language like immediately, fluently. How's that possible? To see the Mishkan pattern, to realize the letters of the alphabet are the Migdalim. And you see it, and you see the pattern, and you know it, and there it is. And then you know him. That's not ever happened before. Okay, we got to take the break here.